Nice to see you.
Thanks for doing this.
All right, so that we can use as much of your time as possible. I think everybody here knows who Bill LaPlante is. We had the fortune of working together many years ago in the Department of the Air Force in a previous administration before you came back to this one. You have had multiple jobs, I think, because we weren't anticipating the Ukraine invasion when you started, and that in and of itself, and I know has been full time for you. So I could ask you a million questions. Thank you for all the time that you give to AI and interaction, but we're at Farnborough, so maybe I'll just start by asking you to tell us how the trip is going, what you're learning, what you were trying to get out of this trip.
Yeah, I didn't know what to expect because it had been really 10 years since I had been to Farnborough. I think it was the summer of 2014. And so, and of course my memory is a little fade. I remember just going from chalet to chalet in the sun and whatever. And so getting back here, it's been just great, actually. I was trying to think through what's been great about it. Number one, you can't predict ahead of time necessarily what the great part will be. That's part of the interesting thing. You know, you look at the agenda and you look at all the things you're doing and you're not sure. But there's always just fascinating moments, and I've had no less of them. I guess the one thing which, I don't know if you've all experienced it, but there's a lot of work getting done. I mean, there's a lot of us that are running in and out of rooms and going on phones and doing email. It's actually work going on around the world. And so like, that's one thing where, and I was literally on the phone driving here with an ambassador in another part of the world. And I said, well, I'm gonna see that person in an hour. I'll get back to you. Or I'm gonna, and I think I called the person and I wrote the note back to the ambassador. So stuff like that is just happening all around you. And you're just like, well, this is a good place to be. Because you got everybody here that you're all talking about the same kind of things, but you're also doing all this other business. The other thing I would say is that it's probably my I don't know which word, confirmation bias, but I feel a sense of more of the weight shifting towards increased thinking about manufacturing and end use. And if you want to call it supplying, of course, it's all related. Yeah, sure, the new technology's there and all the cool stuff, but it was so interesting to go from display and conversation. And people are thinking about it. They're thinking about, maybe they always were and we just weren't listening. I don't know, maybe I wasn't. But I think that the reality of the last couple of years has shown all of us that we got to get into this manufacturing and sustainment business heavy. And that stuff's really important, and it's got to be cheap, and it's got to be doable, and it's got to be doable in places where you can't, you know, it's not a peacetime thing. You got to be doing it under fire. And we're all thinking like that. So I got that sense, which is really encouraging. I also was really encouraged, you know, and you always want to be careful about, you don't want to compliment damn by faint praise, but many of the folks that I engaged with knew what they were talking about. And I don't mean that, but it's going to sound like damn by faint praise. But what I mean is that you had the folks that were actually doing the work right there. And so you could have conversations and you could get 3-4 questions in and keep going. And what you get when you do that is you also get folks passionate about what they do. So you leave something like this very, very encouraged. So those are some observations.
So, by the way, I know many of you were here for Frank Kendall yesterday. I'm going to leave time for questions from all of you. So,
and I will give the other point of view.
You know, you've spent a lot of time focused on collective support of Ukraine and the second and third order effects that we've uncovered with this war, capability and capacity. And this year, your office released a new defense industrial base strategy. as did the Europeans.
Yeah.
I describe ours as being a little bit more focused on cooperation and a little bit more focused on competition. How are things going in that regard? And how long do you think we will stay focused on the lessons we've learned from Ukraine in terms of needing to have capacity for duration, but also the importance of doing it collectively?
Yeah, you know, there always, as the old saying goes, there's always lessons. The question is, are there lessons to learn? And so, you know, so I think it's going to be with us for a while. I think a lot of this, just like many of us were, you know, whether it was some of us old enough to remember the Cold War, or certainly the days after 9/11. A lot of that is in our DNA. I think these moments will be in our DNA for years to come. And so what things now there is, if you haven't noticed, there's much more, and part of it's still in the rhetoric phase, but there's action on, I'm going to use the word co, but co could mean multi-country, production certainly, but now more and more discussions, again, going back to even the design, and of course the sustainment. That was happening, or going to happen in my view. The National Defense Strategy, no, but the National Defense Strategy tried to put that together into how it all fits. And there's just multiple ways that these all kind of come together, including Ukraine. One example for Ukraine is that since May of 2022, Secretary Austin has held at the ministerial level what's called the Ukraine Contact Group, which you've heard. And it's basically an ad hoc group that he's led, and it's been incredible to deliver stuff to the Ukrainians. Ukrainians come in, basically we say they say to the ministerial level, we need this, who's doing this? And then right afterwards, he had me stand up the version of it with the National Armaments Directors. And we had our, 14th one last week. And what you find is that when you get the people together, which also includes industry, responsible for actually the delivery, the equipment being usable, workable, and being able to be trained and operated, and you get past the happy talk and and all the introductory stuff pretty fast, and you get right into it, and you get stuff done. And what you quickly find is you find yourself going right to production rates. What are you doing? What are we doing? What can you do? What can we do? Then you start saying, why don't we do it together? Which is co-production. And then, in this case, we had Germany stand up and say they want to do the GEM-T, which is the Raytheon version of Patriot, in Germany. And they're leading that. And now we're having initiatives like that going to be happening all over. Announcements are going to continue over the next several months of countries doing production together. But once you focus on production, because we all want more things from Ukraine, you go left of that and right of it. You go left because you say, geez, would it be nice if we did more designs together? Rather than waiting until the design is done. And then you go to the other end and say, well, geez, 70% of the costs have been sustainment. Why don't we start doing that together? And that's what you're seeing, and that's why you're seeing the regional sustainment framework. I think that momentum is going. It will continue. There'll be the counterforces. The counterforces will, as they always will be, will say sovereignty. We need our own jobs, our own systems, and that's going to always be there. It's okay. But I think the trend is going completely in the other direction, out of necessity. And the Russians and the Chinese motivated it.
Do you think are the counterforces in the United States different? Because there were always strong counterforces in the U.S. too, especially on the co-sustainment part of it. Are you seeing a shift in attitudes towards co-production, co-design, co-sustainment?
I am, but it's probably human nature, how we all think. But you'll get folks, all of us, intellectually get it. But then when you get down into, okay, now this means we got to do X. People go like this, and then you say, no, we really got to do X. So it's really important to take real world cases and do them, because it makes it really real. That's why the GEM-T that Germany's doing is really important. Because everyone says, look, if we could do it there, and we could do Gibblers and Prism in Australia, why can't we do this here at NASAMS in Norway, or NSMs in Norway, or some of these other air defense systems in the United States? But if you find when you get to that point is when people say, oh, I have to think differently. An example being, there's so many folks trained on all the dangers of transfer of technology and what to watch out for, whether it's ITAR and security classification, all that, and they've been all well trained, and so all those instincts come out. whenever you bring up something, all those things come out. You have people who are expert, well-meaning people, telling you all the obstacles you have. And whereas the thing that's changing is you say, I got the obstacles. What are the solutions? No, you've got to hear about the obstacles. I know the obstacles. And so it's changing the conversation, and it's changing. But there's a lot of experts on the obstacles, and those experts just have to be shown that's an interesting expertise. Go write a book. But where we are today is actually getting beyond the obstacles into solving. And there's, it's easy to say this, it's a cliche, but the threat of not sharing is much greater in some cases than the threat of sharing. So I see it changing, but I think people have to see success cases. And once they see the success, and they are seeing it, I think it'll stick.
How you think it's changing in the Department of Defense too?
Well, it's not that it's not changing, it's that people are so busy that unless forces cause us to think differently, we wouldn't. And the forces are making us think differently. One thing that I've been doing quietly is whenever we have one of these co-production things come along, we have a bunch of them right now in the hopper, I make sure that the service, particularly the PEO, the Army, Navy, Air Force, Space Force, they're at the tip of the spear of it. That it's not some office up in OSD that's doing it. The office up in OSD might help get going, but you give it right to the people on the front lines, right to the people that know how to deal with their industry partners, and make them own it, and they'll figure out a better way. So it's a way, if you get it into the PEOs and the PMs and the contracting officers, then you get it in, and that's what we're doing. And it's funny, when you give a PEO, you've got now this job to make sure the co-production line in this country is as good as the production line in the United States. That's your job. They'll do it. They'll do it. So it's things like that. If you don't do that, people are so busy, they'll keep doing their job.
One more question, I'm going to open it up here. So this is a war on the European continent, existential, visceral, but we're also continuing to focus more intently on the Indo-Pacific, China, Taiwan, and out of this comes AUKUS.
Yeah.
Is that, how is that succeeding from the Defense Department perspective, and is that, it seems like a forcing function to change some of these attitudes about barriers in
Yeah, AUKUS, and I've said this, AUKUS is a forcing function to change behavior, not unlike perhaps the forcing function of the Polaris sales agreement that was put together, I think, by President Kennedy and his counterpart in the UK back, I think it was early 1963, which is still valid and embedded in our culture to this day, which means those of you who are familiar with the SSBNs, if you go into a Trident SSBN or go onto a Trident SSBN submarine, go in the missile compartment, then you go over to a Vanguard submarine and go into their missile compartment, they're identical. Everything is shared, and it's just normal. The exercise data is shared, the missile performance data, the tests are shared. That is a normal way of doing business. That's what AUKUS will do in both Pillar 1, and we got to get it to do it in Pillar 2. And so, yes, but for Pillar 2, I think we're going to have to get to concepts that are valuable to warfighter and contracting to get industry from those three countries to collaborate together. That's the piece we have to do to get that final part of Pillar 2.
Thanks. More questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, Valerie Smith from Breaking Defense.
Well played.
That is not my question. Thank you for taking this, Dr. LaPlante.
Of course.
So, it's been a very busy couple of weeks in American electoral politics.
Yeah, you'll tell me more.
Yeah. So, we're in a situation right now where we don't know who the Democratic nominee is going to be. President Trump, we don't really know whether if he's elected, he's going to follow the same sort of defense policies that he did in the past, or whether he's going to move to a little bit more isolationist bent. What are you hearing from allies, and your counterparts from other nations in terms of questions or concerns about the future of U.S. defense investment, cooperation in Europe, and the commitment to Ukraine?
obviously in the middle of, regardless of what's actually happening in the last 2 weeks. Every 4 years, of course, we know in this country that we come back for elections and have a potential administration change. So all of us know that and have known it, obviously, for forever. So we all have known that, you know, that there's events that we know. We know of a November election in the United States. We have the elections, of course, that have happened in Europe and the UK. And then we know that at elections, you potentially have a change in policy. You potentially have a change in policy. And that's the way it's supposed to be. What we do in jobs like mine is look at what are the things that we have to make sure, if indeed the policy decisions of the country are continue to be what they are, need to continue. So in the specific example of these international co-production items, we need to set that up in my mind to continue that, get that successful, get contracts underway, and should there be a change, sure, down the road there could be a change. But we think it's the right policy. I think regardless of perhaps your politics, when you look at it, it sort of makes sense. I think any of you who listened yesterday to the Prime Minister address this conference, you know, production, jobs, and security are pretty much with us regardless of your politics. And so if you focus on those things and focus on getting the stuff that you have underway, get it secure and in a good place, regardless of what happens in the election, which is what we were supposed to do anyway. Now, you always know that once the election year comes around, things will happen and all that. But you still have to focus on that piece. But you have to be realistic and know, yes, we know it's on everybody's mind. Yes. Yeah, sorry.
Brian Emerson, Aviation Week. Within the past year, there's been some big moves. The Army's canceled FARA. We're hearing the Air Force kind of wavering on where they want to go with NGAD and near-term spending.
Yeah.
The Navy's cutting FAXX funding by quite a lot. I'm not asking you to specifically comment on those programs, but more broadly, where is there a place for big new aircraft development programs that, depending on budget, we have to focus so much on the here and now and so much on new?
Yeah. So first of all, I don't know that I don't know if we characterize it as big new aircraft programs. You're talking about how do we continue to at volume and at effects continue to have air superiority, regardless whether it's airplanes or whatever. That has to continue. I think in the examples that you gave, they were all examples. This is in no way forgiving the difficulty of choices, but one thing we have to do, always do, is not, once we start something into serious development, EMD, if we call it that, milestone B, we really need to continue it. In both of those cases, they're still in the pre-full-scale development phase, and that's the phase to really look at it and say, you know, is this something that's in the right place to go into full-scale development? So it can't be that everything that starts, even before you've gone into full-scale development, has to continue. That would be crazy. On the other hand, you have to provide the stability to industry and the warfighter to continue with your themes and follow through on what you're going to do. And we know that. In the case of, I would point out the positive in the case of CCA. I think that's a great program going forward. It's really groundbreaking in terms of the cost per plane. It's going to be a third of an F-35A model, which is like $82 million, a third of that. You have two industry vendors that are now in there that are not the traditional ones that you would necessarily have in this space. I think there's also a lot of opportunity for potentially other countries coming into that program. In the case of what the Air Force and the Navy are doing for their next generation, I think it's not that they're not sure. I think what they're sorting out is making sure they understand it's like the beginning of B-21, which was up till about 2011. We really had to understand what was the cost point, no kidding, and what are the exact con-ops of this thing, and get on with it. And they're gonna figure it out. It's not gonna stop. It's gonna continue. It's just gonna be better informed. And I think if we didn't do this, it wouldn't be very smart. Now, every time you do that, you might introduce some bit of uncertainty, but that's not the intent. And I'm confident that the the modernization of air power is going to absolutely continue. But it's going to need to always be assessed in light of the threat and of course the budget. The budget is not going up all the time. You have to make choices all the time. So I think that's the way to think about it. It's not always the most satisfying answer, but that's the reality of it. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Would you like to share your observations in terms of what has happened with respect to Ukraine and the Russian countermeasures as it relates to delivery of the ability to take out aircraft defense systems, and furthermore, the way forward given the time period and sensitivity to results.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, share your thoughts in terms of what have we learned, what have you learned, and what's available to be done in a relevant time frame, not so much on the production side, which takes time, but you've got inventories of different kinds.
Yeah, so what we've learned, which some of this may be in hindsight not that surprising. Number one, I think when all of us who've looked at warfare for the past 10, 15 years knew EW, the spectrum, of course, and control of the spectrum was critical, whether for comms, whether for navigation, IFF, sensing, and the rest. And we've known that, but it's taken a while to see it in practice. And in the initial part of Ukraine, largely it was the dog that didn't bark, excuse me. It was, largely not happening in terms of ability to get satellite navigation and do other communications. It took time, but as the conflict progressed, the adversary, and this goes both ways, it's a cat and mouse game, each side is doing what it is, started putting in place these means to deny the spectrum to the other side. You can deny the spectrum by, obviously by kinetic means, by shooting down transmitters, or you can deny it by putting your own energy into the air, or taking out the satellite navigation. And of course, it's very geographic specific, not just in 2 dimensions, but in 3. You got to worry about altitude. And it's a cat and mouse game. Every time one side puts in a measure, the other side has a countermeasure. To the point of the question, if the countermeasure are very much hardware platform specific, then you're going to be in a slow evolution and you're going to be outgunned because the speed is slow. So the countermeasures on each side have to be things that are quick, modular. They can swap in a new antenna or swap in some new software. But I would warn people that not everything can be solved in near real time in software. At some point, you may need a better rocket motor, but even those can be swapped out very quickly. So I think what we learned is the adversary thinks, and they change, and they learn. And learning is not just about the technology. Of course, it's a technology. It's a mixture of the technology, what we call the tactics, techniques, and procedures. The adversary tries this, sees how we react. And we, in this case, could be our allies. Could try that, see how we react. And it's a constant back and forth, and you have to be on your toes. And you can have a very, very successful few weeks, but know that the next engagement, there's going to be something else thrown at us. And war has always been like this. If you read about it, it's always been like this. I think the key point is, don't be complacent, don't be cocky, don't think if you hear back from the front lines that your thing is really great and all this, don't assume it's going to stay that way. And also remember that that anything that you can think of, they can probably think of it too. So you have to be in this kind of loop all the time. And the other piece is tactics matter. The solution to something can be a different tactic and have nothing to do with technology. But it's what we've always known. The enemy has a vote. So.
Yeah. Back corner there.
Hi,
Yeah.
Alison Lambert from Reuters. DOJ is expected to put out Boeing's guilty plea for Boeing this week.
Yes.
Under what circumstances would you not be able to do procurements with Boeing in the future?
On this case or any case, we would take our lead from what the legal authorities in both the Department and the Department of Justice would tell us and give us the guidance to do. And I'm not saying that predicting any outcome. I would just say we would abide by whatever the legal guidance that we're given. Yes, hi.
Continuation on the question that I asked
Yeah.
you, Ukraine, it reminds me of the counterterrorism war
Yeah.
and the Gulf War, when we had this cat and mouse game.
Yes.
It reminds me of counter-IED, JIDO.
Yeah.
And it typically, wars like that happen like that. So we have, how do you balance the so-called QRC, JUONs, the loss of military requirements evolving, not program of record. And if you look back, the counterterrorism days, same in Ukraine, whatever the programs we have and the budget plans we have kind of went by the wayside, and now all these new things, new way of fighting the war,
Yeah.
evolving. So as an ANS, you have budgets, you have JROD,
Yeah.
then you got all these new requirements thrown at you. How do you balance that?
Yeah, it's a challenge, but we sort of, unfortunately, we've learned how to do it over the last 20 years. It's been our world. In fact, one thing that we learned from the conflicts that, Fadi, that you said, and I'm not at all, we all went through those periods of time where we rushed equipment under JUONs into theater, whether it's Iraq or Afghanistan. We knew that a lot of the equipment that we were giving was maybe one single-use equipment, but people's lives were at stake and time was of the urgency. The classic example is the MRAPS task force that Secretary Gates did. But we all saw that. We also learned things from that. Number one, we learned that you have a different mindset if it's something to be used in a somewhat permissive environment where you control the airspace, you control the ground, and that you have the luxury of trying something, and if it doesn't work, you can put it aside. If you're in a conflict like we're in now against a high-end adversary, you don't have those permissive environments at all, so the types of things that will work are totally different. Second thing is you probably don't have the luxury over time to just keep providing lots of different ideas and equipment, because at some point it overwhelms our ally. The Ukrainians at times privately and publicly have said, at some point they call a lot of the equipment they have a zoo, because you get so much stuff and it can become overwhelming. And so the answer isn't just to field something quickly, because you have to be a little more thoughtful about it, because also, and this may be a little bit different, it's not that we didn't have to train forces in the counter IED fight, of course we did, but now you have operational and strategic level maneuver and things that have to be coordinated and can't be just at a tactical level. And what may be very effective at a tactical level might not make much of a difference at an operational level. And so it's a bit of a difference. And so I think the other piece of it is the impact on sustainment. The other piece, which we all remember, is you could repair things in country, including with contractors. You could send a lot of folks. We sent a lot of people into Iraq and Afghanistan, including we had one point I think more contractors than we did active duty. In a high-end fight, you do not have that option. We're not doing that right now. So it's really, the lessons are really a little different. We're actually not terribly much in a JUON situation like we were in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's not quite like that, partially because we have standing JUONs. These are urgent operational needs, requests from the warfighter, that we can fit things under. And it's more a set of capabilities that largely is working, or if it's challenged, has to be improved, that have to network together. And you have to think of it more as a whole, and you have to think about it, we call it the .mil PF piece. All the doctrine, the training, all that stuff matters so much more than you do if you have like a counterterrorism fight and you have the luxury of giving them something and having them throw it aside, give them something else. So it's a little different. Yeah.
One more question.
Hi.
Audrey Deckers, Defense Fund, thanks for doing this.
Sure.
The Defense Innovation Board recently released a report, and they said one of the things they were saying was that we need a new undersecretary for international cooperation, and we need to merge acquisition and armed research. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. Sure. We should look at that. I mean, you know, I think that there was a lot, of course, energy spent, whenever it was 2016, 2017, at what led up to the split of the old AT&L and R&E and A&S. But there's a lot in the world that's changed since then. One of the more important things that happened back then, and I think has been a success, has been a lot more delegation to the services on a lot of acquisition authorities. The world has also changed we'll look at what we're talking about, the importance of production now, and not in high-end production. So should there always be a close connection between S&T, and R&D, and main acquisition and production? Yes, there always should be. And could it be handled by organizational structures? It could be. But I think I just think that it's right for boards to always be looking at that. I've been on boards and we often would give recommendations, and it's right for them to do that. I just would say that the fundamentals of what's happening now don't change, and that is that production is now much more important than it was. We now have an industrial strategy. We now have much more going internationally. The services now have the lead on most of the acquisition programs. That we have, unlike then, we have a preponderance of prototypes going on out there with whether it's SCO, DIU, DARPA, AFRL, tons of those things. We have a limited budget, and we have to get these things into the palm, hence we have questions about why was this program not continued. So that stuff still continues, and whether there's the org chart itself changes or not, I've learned over my career just to focus on where I am right now. So that's my answer to your question.
And with that, Bill,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. What's that? Sorry.
Yeah, these are my very expensive Costco glasses.
I come from Amazon.